way this could have happened. We have 2 witnesses that confirm that. There's no way that Joanne could have gotten a clear look through the balcony at 3 in the morning when it was dark and know for sure that that was James Woodard who was taking Beverly away, and said that, talked about inconsistencies in Oscar's testimony, that he got a lot of dates wrong, and so we can't fully, he's not a fully credible witness, that he may have seen James at 3 in the morning. And the defense says, I submit to you that's not enough. That's just not enough. There is reasonable doubt here. You see, that girl could have been with anybody. There is testimony at one time she was a hooker. There is also some testimony about the track marks on her arm. You can take all that into account. I submit to you that there is reasonable doubt. I don't think the state has met its burden. You have no choice but to find my client, James Woodard, not guilty. Then the prosecution gets their chance to give their closing statement. So the prosecution talks about the witnesses that saw Woodard at night taking Beverly away. Talks about the testimony of witnesses who saw regular bruising, regular marks on the body of Beverly right after they started dating, and that they saw them fight and argue. Said Ruby was just making up an alibi because she wanted to get her ex-boyfriend back, basically, and that this wasn't really true. Prosecution says, I submit to you, don't be taken in and don't be misled. You know what we have here. We have a murderer and you're looking straight at him. Ask you to find this defendant, James Lee Woodard, guilty on the offense of murder so we can proceed to the next phase of this trial. Okay, so both sides have presented all their evidence, and then now it's up to the jury. So the jury can find James Woodard guilty or not guilty. So if you were the jury, how many people, by show of hands, would find James guilty, just based on this evidence alone? I mean, I can certainly see why a jury would. Yeah, I mean, based on that evidence, I can see why a jury would find it. I don't know that I would for sure, but I can see why. Like, it's no shock to me that the jury found him guilty. So the jury began their deliberations on May 21st, 1981 at 4:15. At 4:45, they came back with their verdict. 30 minutes. That's never probably a good sign for defense if they're not even talking about it that much. So just 30 minutes later, the jury had reached a verdict. The judge read the verdict to the courtroom. We, the jury, find the defendant, James Lee Woodard, guilty of the offense of murder. So he was found guilty. So in Texas, we have what's called a bifurcated trial. So the first part of the trial is figuring out guilt or not guilt. The second part of the trial is about sentencing. So during the guilt or not guilt phase, you can't bring up any kind of past crimes because it's only are they guilty or not guilty for this particular crime, right? But during the sentencing portion, how long do we want to put this person away or how much punishment, we have to look at kind of the future dangerousness. Like how dangerous do we believe this person is to society? And in the sentencing phase, you absolutely can bring up past crimes. There's also a thing in Texas called the Habitual Offender Act, where if someone has been a habitual criminal, if they've done past crimes, then you can make this sentence harsher, right? Because they've been shown to kind of, not be rehabilitated for past crimes, and we think he's probably going to continue committing crimes. So again, they can argue about this, right? So the prosecution says, I want you to think about that girl and the 10 minutes it took to strangle her and the 10 minutes it took for her to die after she was drugged, obviously unconscious, out there through the bushes. Woodard was given a life sentence for the murder of Beverly Ann Jones, so a life sentence. And part of that was because of the past crimes that I talked about before. So when that comes back up, then a life sentence. Probably it may have just been like 20 years. I mean, not that 20 years anything to, but a life sentence had a lot to do with those past crimes. Okay, so new evidence emerges. So just 2 months after the original trial, we get some new evidence. And it turns out that the prosecution knew about some of this evidence, but didn't tell the defense about it. Okay, so the defense is asking for a new trial on July 17, 1981. So again, this is just 2 months after he's been found guilty and sentenced to life in prison. So when they ask for a new trial, They go in front of a judge, and the judge just looks at the new evidence that is available, and the judge makes a determination whether it would have made a difference in the verdict, right, of the past trial, okay? So even if there's new evidence, they have to prove that it would have made a difference in the verdict in order to get a whole new trial, okay? And the judge happens to be the same judge that did the original trial. Yeah, so he's the one that decides whether there's a new trial. So he's the one that hears all the evidence. So this new evidence shows that Beverly Ann Jones was actually with 3 men the night that she was killed. 3 men. And the prosecution knew about this, interviewed the 3 men, and didn't tell the defense. Okay, so it's actually so when Oscar came home and her stuff was there, but she wasn't there, she had called some of her friends and said, hey, I want to go do something. They came, picked her up, and then she went to go hang out with them. So they drank a lot of beer. Like I said, the defense just didn't know anything about this until 2 months later. So they did the motion for a new trial, and those 3 men, they actually got them to come to the stand and say what happened that night with Beverly Ann Jones. So the 3 men, one of them is named Eddie Woodard. There's no relation. It just happens to be the same last name. No relation. Eddie Woodard is the first witness that is going to the judge with this new evidence. So he said that he spent time with Beverly on the night of December 28th. So he says, again, the blue is directly from the trial transcripts. I got transcripts of this new evidence trial as well. So it was kind of late that night, between 8:30 and 10 p.m. We went to pick her up. She called me and she wanted to go somewhere to a party just to have a good time. I told her I had to work the next morning, so we couldn't pick her up that night, but I told her she could come to my house, so we went and picked her up. So Eddie said that he and his cousin, Theodore Blalock, and a friend, Edward Mosley, all went and picked Beverly up and then brought her back to Eddie's house. They said they turned on some music, drank a few beers. She had one, and me and Theodore and Mosley drank the rest. They had 2 6-pack of beers that they all drank that night. So it said Beverly stayed there until just after midnight, and then Theodore and Mosley, so 2 of the guys, take Beverly home because Eddie had to work the next morning, so he didn't take her home. They drove her home in the early morning hours of December 29th, so around 2, 3 a.m., the same time that the neighbors said that they heard screams. Eddie also testified that the prosecutor did speak to them before the original trial. So he did tell the prosecutor all this before the original trial. The prosecutor did not tell anybody, or didn't tell the defense. Okay, then Edward Mosley, so the second guy, also spoke to the judge. So basically gave the same account. So said that they went to Eddie's house and they had some beers there. And so Edward and Theodore were taking Beverly back home and stopped at a 7-Eleven, said that she got out of the car to get like a pack of chewing gum or something. And while she was in 7-Eleven, she met some people that she knew, and then she got in the car with them, and then they left. And so Edward was saying that, you know, we just saw her at 7-Eleven. It was around 2, 3 in the morning. We don't know how many people were in the car. We don't know what color the car was. I don't remember anything about the car. But at that 7-Eleven, that was the last time we saw her. She went off with other people. Okay, then Theodore Blalock also gets up on stand. And Theodore was actually in jail at the time for aggravated rape. Yes. So Blalock basically said the same thing as Eddie Woodard and Edward Mosley, that she went into the 7-Eleven and that was the last time they saw her. So Theodore says, I think she bought some chewing gum, she was talking to some guy, and she told me she was riding back with him. The defense asked, she talked to some guy inside the store. Theodore says, right. Was it a friendly conversation? Could you tell? Well, I wasn't paying much attention to what they were talking about. She was alone or with other people. She was in a car with 2 other guys. Theodore, again, just like Edward, couldn't remember the kind of car or the color. And he said that he and Edward left before he saw Beverly actually leave with those people, but they just assumed that that's what she did. Okay, so do you think this is enough evidence to grant a new trial. Would this information have possibly changed the verdict? Again, you can't say for sure, but possibly, okay? So here's the judge's ruling. I was the presiding judge in the trial of this case, and I have heard the evidence presented, and I deny the motion for a new trial. So deny the motion. So the judge says, nope, that wouldn't have mattered at all, no big deal. So the life sentence for James Woodard stands. Okay, so here he is, his mugshot, and now he is confined to life in prison. But he doesn't give up. So in prison, he is begging and pleading anyone who might listen to him. He's writing letters and writing letters and writing letters. Here are some of the letters that he wrote. He has very nice handwriting. And here, like, he's been in prison for 3 years. He's still writing letters. So I'll read just one part of one of the letters to him. He was doing it to Dallas District Attorney Henry Wade. So he's like, please reconsider this, please. I'm not guilty here. I'm innocent. You've got an innocent man in prison here. So I'll read just part of it, part of one of the letters, because I've read a lot of them. There were 2 victims in my case, the murdered victim and myself. I feel certain that if this case had been investigated adequately, this miscarriage of justice would not have occurred. I refuse to believe that with all the advanced technology that exists today, that authorities were unable to solve this murder had they really tried. I could name a number of discrepancies, but that isn't necessary in the present because in general my entire trial was totally unfair. I didn't even have an examining trial and was refused a lie detector test. I've appealed to you in every way I can, and I'm tired. You seem to be adamant in your decision not to investigate my case, but I won't give up until I get this thing out in the open because it's wrong for me to be here. It's one thing for me to be here for what you've done, but it's totally different for me to be here for something you haven't done. My communication is limited, but I won't allow that handicap to stop from writing everyone I can think of to bring this grave injustice to light. I'm a young man, and I have a right to freedom and the pursuit of happiness just as everyone else. So he wrote a lot of letters, over and over and over again, hoping that somebody would hear him. I mean, it's certainly possible. You know, we can never say that for sure, but it's certainly possible. So this is the response. One of the responses, he really didn't get that many responses, maybe 3 total. So this is from the district attorney in Dallas. This is the official letter. We have further investigated the claim you made in your letter. Contrary to your statements, it appears that you and your attorney have both advised prior to the end of the trial, that the names of both individuals to whom were the victims earlier the night that she disappeared. As a matter of fact, I've been advised that both men were questioned by your attorney. So the district attorney is saying, hey, you know, your defense knew about these. It was these witnesses. It was your defense attorney's fault. And of course, his defense attorneys were like, no, we absolutely didn't. We would have put them on the stand. But the district attorney, Henry Wade, at the time, which this name will come up again, is saying that there was no mistake done here. Like, your defense attorneys knew. It's not our fault that they didn't present them, basically. Okay, so Woodard wrote letters, sent pleas for help. Woodard was up for parole 12 times. 12 times. He had like almost perfect record in prison. He exhibited good behavior. Every single time he went up for parole, they wouldn't even consider him because he would not admit his guilt. If he had just admitted his guilt, probably he would have been released. But he wouldn't admit his guilt, so they said, hey, as long as you're still denying that you did anything, we can't release you. We have to keep you in here. So new DNA technology is out, right? So this is like in the early 2000s, late 1990s. James Woodard, learns about this DNA technology and asks for the Dallas District Attorney. He hopes that some of the clothing, some of the evidence is still, that they got off of Beverly's body is still there. And he's hoping, okay, DNA evidence can prove that I wasn't the person because he knew that he didn't do it. And so he asked the Dallas District Attorney, hey, will you at least test, the DNA on this? Can you at least do that? And the Dallas District Attorney said no, and then they said that we don't even have the evidence available anymore. So the evidence isn't even around anymore. We absolutely cannot do this. He kept filing again and again. Here he is in prison 25 years later. He kept fighting. Innocence Project got involved and started fighting for him, especially when DNA evidence, the DNA technology came out. And so they kind of got on his case. Another thing that happened, so Innocence Project started fighting for him. Also, we had a new district attorney in Dallas named Craig Watkins, and he started a conviction integrity unit to kind of look into cases of possible wrongful convictions. So most district attorneys, they don't want to admit that there were any mistakes, right? So they don't really want to look into it. Craig Watkins kind of had the opposite, stance. And he had a list of all of the people who had asked to have their DNA tested that had been denied. Craig Watkins got that list and went through it and was trying to see, is there anybody that we can test? And so when he got that list, with the Innocence Project kind of pushing also, then he dug into this case. Turns out the evidence was absolutely there. It didn't go anywhere. It was there, and it was still in the shape to be tested, even from 1980. So, again, the Innocence Project looked into this. There was a Texas law student who was kind of working on this case with the Innocence Project. They looked at the file. They fought for the DNA test to happen. So the DNA test actually happened on December 28, 2008. So this is 28 years from the time of his alibi with Ruby, right? So the DNA test came back. So what do you think the results were? The DNA did not match. So it did not match him at all. And all of the medical investigator at the time, they all said that according to all the evidence, the person who raped Beverly Ann Jones was also the person that killed her. And so if the DNA didn't match for the rape, then that couldn't have been the person that killed her. So couldn't have murdered Beverly Ann Jones. So I actually have a video that 60 Minutes was actually filming when James Lee Woodard found out that his DNA test came back negative. So we can actually watch the moment that he found out that his DNA test came back negative. Hoping this works. That's about a 12-minute video. Talks about kind of wrongful convictions overall.
Some bitter souls.
Let me turn this up.
Searching going on in Dallas County as one man after another is being released from prison after being convicted years ago of crimes they did not commit. It happened again just last week with the release of a man who had been proclaiming his innocence behind bars for 27 years. So far, 17 men have been cleared in Dallas. That's more than most states. And all were put on trial by prosecutors who worked for the legendary district attorney, Henry Wade. Wade was Dallas's top prosecutor for more than 30 years. He never lost a case that he handled personally. But it turns out the record of Wade's office was too good to be true. And now, a new Dallas district attorney is focusing on the Wade legacy. It's a search for innocent men waiting to be exonerated. James Woodard went away in 1981, convicted in the murder of his girlfriend who had been raped and strangled. He was prosecuted by the Office of District Attorney Henry Wade. For nearly 30 years, he never gave up writing letters, filing motions, but no one was willing to grant him a hearing until now. We were there last year when Woodard gave the DNA sample that would determine his true guilt or innocence. Since 2001, there has been a series of men in Dallas County who have walked from prison into freedom.
They said justice is blind. That's because someone turned the head.
The exonerated include Eugene Hinton, James Waller, who did almost 11 years, Greg Wallace, who was in for nearly 19, and James Giles, who did 10. Billy Smith was convicted of aggravated sexual assault.
Did 19 years, 10 months, 7 days.
Nearly 20 years for something you didn't do. Respect.
James Waller rejected a plea bargain for a rape he didn't commit.
He offered me 3 years, I turned it down. And that's when we go to trial. And I came out with 3 years.
Why did you turn down the deal?
I know one day I was gonna have to die, and I don't wanna go before God saying I did something I didn't do.
Greg, what did you lose in all that time?
Well, I didn't get to see my boy growing up. He was 2.5 when I left,
How old was he when you got out?
22.
To me, apology, it won't do, because apology can't bring back the time that I spent. It can't bring back my loved ones. I lost 10 family members while I was incarcerated. Never got to go to the funeral of any one of them. There are a lot of things that I can say that I lost, and then there's a lot of things that I can say that I can't tell you what I lost, because I don't know.
What do you mean you don't know what you lost?
It's just like a part of me that's just gone. You know, I'm 20 years behind time. I was 35 when I got arrested, 55 now. But when I was ready for release, I wasn't excited about getting out. I still don't understand that today.
How could you not be excited about getting out after all that time?
Well, that's a part of me that I lost.
Michelle Moore and Jeff Blackburn are lawyers for the Innocence Project of Texas, a nonprofit group investigating wrongful prosecutions.
What was the history of the Dallas County DA's office from, say, the 1950s to the 1990s? Michelle?
Prosecute at all costs.
Prosecute at all costs.
Right. It doesn't matter what they have as far as evidence, but if they've got anything that can tie this person into the case, then they were going to pursue the case against that person, even if it meant that they overlooked other suspects in a crime.
Dallas got a reputation as the hardest, roughest county in the state. This was the one county that you did not want to get accused of a crime in, because in this county, if you got charged with a crime, you were likely going to go to prison.
It was the late Henry Wade, a Texas legend, who ran the DA's office from 1951 to 1987.
Get this over with.
Wade prosecuted Jack Ruby in the murder of Lee Harvey Oswald. He's the Wade in Roe versus Wade, the abortion case. His deputies played hardball, but Moore says they didn't always play by the rules.
And we have found in some of those cases that there was evidence that was not given over to the defense. So the defense could not adequately prepare.
You're saying the prosecutors had evidence that suggested innocence, and they didn't pass that on to the defense attorneys?
That's correct.
But that's the law, isn't it?
It is the law, but there's no penalty for prosecutors who don't give over evidence. You get a slap on the hand, but you still get promoted because you got the conviction.
Prosecutors break the law, pay no penalty. Men get wrongfully convicted, and they can't get out because the system conspires to cover up their case. That's a crooked system.
It's a new day in Dallas County.
The investigation of the Wade legacy picked up speed last year when Craig Watkins became the district attorney in Dallas, the first black DA in the history of Texas. His office is now spending $400,000 a year looking back at old cases.
We have a responsibility to go back and right the wrongs of the past and free the innocent.
You know, some people say that you're wasting time and money, that you're looking back at these old cases when you're sitting in the middle of the city that has the highest crime rate in the nation.
You know, I disagree with that. The job of the district attorney is to seek justice, and when justice has failed, then we have to fix it.
You know, we were sitting with some of these men who'd been in prison for 20 years, been in prison longer than that, and as I was sitting there, it occurred to me that if these guys sat in prison that long, it's likely that somebody who didn't commit the crime was executed. Do you fear that that's the case?
I fear that. And that causes me to lose sleep every day.
In an almost revolutionary step, Watkins has teamed up with the Innocence Project of Texas, opening all of the prosecution files to the project's lawyers and law students. He's backing them with subpoena power so they can get a hold of witnesses and evidence. The students are opening files that have been closed, some since the 1970s.
we take a lot for granted, I think, and we say, oh, well, if the government said that he did it, he obviously did. But that's not necessarily true.
Are you getting paid for this?
No.
Are you getting college credit for this?
No.
Nothing?
No.
You're getting nothing out of this?
Well, the satisfaction that I'm doing something for people who can't do it themselves.
Law student Alexis Hoff selected James Woodard's file for review, almost 3 decades after he went to prison, convicted of killing his girlfriend.
Why should we believe you?
We were with them last November when Hoff started questioning Woodard, along with the Innocence Project's Michelle Moore.
So you've been in prison 27 years?
Yes, ma'am.
James, at any point in time during this process, did you ever admit to being guilty of this?
No, ma'am.
What is your ultimate goal?
To clear my name.
Woodard gave that DNA sample back in November. It was processed by the Orchid Cellmark lab in Dallas. In most places, it wouldn't be possible to reach back years for a DNA match. But Dallas has an unusual policy of saving physical evidence from cases that are decades old. This past Monday, Alexis Hoff and Jeff Blackburn brought James Woodard the results of his DNA test.
The conclusion of the test was that there was not a match. It means that someone else raped Beverly Ann Jones. It is my honor to be here today to tell you that after spending 27 years in jail for a crime you did not commit, you will walk out of this courthouse tomorrow a free man.
I'm speechless. Just about every time I get my money together myself to think this all in.
When James Woodard went to prison in 1981, Alexis Hoff had not yet been there.
I mean, don't crack jokes, man.
No, it's really happening, I know.
You sure I get out tomorrow?
Yeah.
It's really happening.
Thank you.
All rise, please.
The next day, last Tuesday, James Woodard went to court. In addition to the DNA, District Attorney Watkins' office discovered that the prosecutors 27 years ago failed to tell the defense and the jury that Woodard's girlfriend had been in the company of another man the night of her death, a man who was charged in another sexual assault.
Mr. Woodard, we'd like to apologize to you, not only on the part of the District Attorney's Office of the state of Texas, but for the failures of the criminal justice system throughout this country.
State District Judge Mark Stoltz set Woodard free.
Unfortunately, Mr. Woodard, you're not getting justice today. You're just giving the end of injustice.
Seemed like I was looking at it from afar, like a movie. It was well worth the wait. I mean, just to hear that, you know, just to hear someone admit that they were wrong, they did me wrong.
Worth the wait. Why?
For so many years, everyone told me, well, hey, you guilty. I mean, well, let me put it this way. They treated me as if I was guilty.
You went in when you were 27?
I just turned 28,
And how old are you now?
55.
From the very beginning, Woodard wrote letters to District Attorney Henry Wade.
I don't know your philosophy of life, but I would assume that you wouldn't take a man's freedom just because you can. That's why I keep sending these letters to you.
Wade's office wrote back to say that the letter would be referred to an assistant. Woodard never heard anything from them again. I have to wonder, after 27 years, how did you stand it?
You can only go one day at a time. I don't really know myself. I just did the best I could. Just, you know, every day I have hope that maybe today will be a better day.
They had hope.
That's all the man had. I had hope for parole. I think I came up about 12 times.
When you appeared before the parole board, what did they say to you?
They always told me, as long as you deny your guilt, it's saying something about you. You know, you're not willing to own up to your deed, and we're gonna deny you.
All you had to do
to get out, to get parole, was to tell them that you did it.
Right,
Why didn't you do it?
I wasn't guilty.
You chose truth over freedom.
I mean, a man has to stand for something.
James Woodard became the 17th prisoner in Dallas to be set free after a wrongful conviction. He walked from the courthouse into a hometown he could no longer recognize. At 27 years and 4 months, he became the longest-serving inmate in the nation to be cleared with the help of DNA. The Dallas DA's office and the Innocence Project of Texas are still investigating another 250 cases.
Okay, so he was released when he was 55 years old. After spending 27 years in prison for a crime he did not commit. So this is him leaving the courtroom with Innocence Project attorneys right beside him there. So he was officially pardoned in 2009 by Governor Rick Perry at the time. This is him. D Magazine did a big profile on him right after that, and this is him in Dallas experiencing his freedom here. So who really killed Beverly Ann Jones? So basically we don't know for sure, but Theodore Blalock, one of the people that she was with, was shot and killed by a woman as he was raping her. So we don't know for sure. Also, Eddie Woodard has also been convicted of rape, another person that she was with that night. Edward Mosley has kind of been missing. No one's been able to find him to kind of follow up. Also, so after James Woodard was convicted, the Innocence Project did kind of post-conviction interviews and interviewed Oscar, Beverly Ann's father, and Oscar has since said that he doesn't really think it was James that came to his door at 3 in the morning. Also, the Joanne, the neighbor, has also been re-interviewed and said that actually I was on a lot of prescription drugs at the time. I'm not really sure what I saw that night. But it doesn't matter what they say after, it matters what they say during the trial, right? So there is kind of a tragic ending to James Woodard that I'll talk a little bit about here. So Texas is one of the few states that do this, and one of is actually kind of a leader when it comes to wrongful convictions as far as trying to fix them. But in Texas, if you're wrongfully convicted, you receive $80,000 per year that you were wrongfully convicted. So when James Woodard left, so after being in prison for 27, 28 years, which I can't even imagine what it does to somebody, especially knowing you're innocent, he was given basically a $2.1 million check. Okay, so, you know, whether that's good or not, we can debate that, right? So, I mean, it helps them kind of get a life again, but they don't have a lot of life skills, you know,